Hi, Yvonne. Here's to your 79th birthday. A little bit late, but here's a little toast to it. Hope you have a great year. I'm going to recap your life, Yvonne. It didn't begin in Attleboro, Massachusetts, or Thompson, Connecticut, or Phoenix. It began a long time ago back in France, and though I haven't researched everything yet, I haven't been too successful, I do have some information on the Martin family. And if you'll wait just a moment, I'll show you what I have. The earliest I've been able to find was Pierre Martin. He was born in 1823. He was married to Félicité Renaud de Rosier in 1845 at Saint-Césaire, and that's in Canada. He had a son named Pierre Martin also, who was born in 1855. In 1879, he married Marie de Merce in Farnham. They had a son, Leonidas Martin, born in 1884, and he was married in 1911 in Phoenix, Rhode Island, to Aldia Duquette. And of course, they're our parents. And you are the next generation, the second generation, Yvonne Martin. I don't know when you were married, but I know that it was in Phoenix, and you married Harold Taylor. The first generation are your children, Beverly, Rayner, and Kent. I've done a little more on the Duquettes. I've traced them back to France. The first known Duquette to come to Canada, the 11th generation of the Duquette family, was Denis Duquette. He was born in 1605, but we're not certain where in France he was born. In 1638, he was married in Canada to Catherine Gauthier. She was baptized in 1625, and if she was born that same year, it would mean that she was only 11 years old when they were married. She had her first child at age 16, and there are 11 known surviving children. One of those children was Jean de Rocher Duquette. In 1683, he married Catherine Ursula Amiot. They had a son, Jean the Baptist Duquette. In 1710, he married Genevieve Hall. One of their children, Jean the Baptist Duquette, in 1737 married Marie Ursula Morin. They had a son, Etienne Duquette, who in 1773 married Catherine Amable Surprenant. One of their children, Etienne Duquette, in 1802 was married to Marie Josepha Duquette. One of their children, Medard Duquette, who is our great-grandfather, in 1844 married Marie Cusson. There's an asterisk here, and I'll explain that later. One of their children, Gilbert Duquette, our grandfather, married Marie Peliquin. I have not been able to find out where or when, and I'm still trying to find that information. One of their children, of course, was our mother, Althea Duquette. In 1911, she married Leonidas Martin. And, of course, they had a daughter, Yvonne Martin. And I don't know, of course, the date you were married, and you married Harold Taylor. And your children are the first generation on this chart of 11 generations. Now, the reason there's an asterisk near Marie Cusson I have to make a correction here. Catherine Gauthier was baptized in 1627, not 1625. Now, the reason there's an asterisk next to Marie Cousson's name is that she is the one who brought the nobility into her particular line of the family. She was married to Medard, our great-grandfather, and her great-great-great-great-grandmother was Catherine de Bayon of Montbol, Lamoureux, Ile-de-France. Ile-de-France is the area completely surrounding Paris. Catherine's father, Alphonse de Bayon, was Lord of Valence and La Mosqueterie. He was married to Louise de Marle, also of noble lineage, so both of their families came from nobility. Alphonse's known ancestors, and those of his wife Louise, were lords and ladies of large estates and manors. They lived in manor houses, many of which are still standing in the Loire Valley that's just south of Paris. Many were associated with royalty as handlers of finances, counselors, and secretary to kings. Catherine de Bayon's great-great-grandfather, Adam de Bayon, was the first lord of Valence. He was a notary and secretary to the king and clerk of the Parliament of Rouen. He died before 1551. Her great-great-great-grandfather was Michel de Bayon. He was receiver of aids and other finances of the king, about 1500. He was also lord of Rouen-Ville in Beauce and Viscount of Caudebec. He died after 1515. It's interesting to note that about the mid-1600s, the name de Bayon became simply Bayon. During medieval times, people had only first names. They didn't have last names or surnames. But during that period, the record keepers decided that it would be helpful for people to assume last names or surnames. And so it's quite common that it was common for the nobles at that time to pick up the names of either the manor or the estate that they owned, or the places, the villages or cities where they came from. And hence the name de Bayon. Apparently, they lived in Bayon, and they assumed that the name of that village. Another thing that was interesting was as nobles took the names of the towns or the manors, and in French they were called seigneuries, and they were lord, seigneurs of the seigneuries, the lord of the manor. The interesting thing is that the peasants did not do this. The peasants took the names of their occupations or descriptions of themselves. For instance, Meunier, the last name Meunier, is the name of a person who grinds grain. Another, Laforge, is someone who may have been a blacksmith. In some cases, it was the appearance and the name Lamoureux, or in English we pronounce it Lamoureux. He was the lover, and the name L'Anglais was the Englishman. The name Leblanc meant that the person was either fair-skinned or fair-haired. So this is all quite interesting, and it's fun to read. Now I'm going to take you for a ride through memory. We're going to do some photos, and I hope you won't fall asleep. Here's a picture of our grandfather, Pierre de Meurs, with his wife and all his children. As you can see, the third person standing in the rear is our father, Leonidas. and those are all his brothers and sisters. I haven't been able to identify them yet. This is Leonidas, our father, as a young man. Handsome man, wasn't he? Here he is again. I think I can see Eldridge and Brian in that picture. This is the wedding picture of our parents, Leonidas and Aldea. I'm sure it has to be because I remember the blouse. It used to be in a big old trunk in the attic when we lived on Fairview Avenue. And I remember as a little girl, it was a silky purple blouse with lots of embroidery, but it became torn after a while because it was too hot upstairs, and it just fell apart. This is a picture of Grandpa Pierre Martin and his wife Marie Demers. I'm sure that was taken in Farnham. They were our father Leonidas's parents. On the right, that's a picture of our mother's grandparents. That was Clement Telequin and Rose de Lima Boucher. It took me a long time to find that genealogy, but I went to the town hall in West Warwick in the library looking through old newspapers and finally found some records to determine who they were. This is a picture of our mother, Aldea, with some friends, and probably cousins, but I can't identify anyone except her. And of course, she's the one standing in the front. She was always so tiny that she was always at the forefront of everything. A very pretty young girl, and of course, she was single at that time. Here's another picture of her with friends and or cousins. I can't identify anyone else in the picture, but she is at the center front. Wasn't she pretty? Here she is again with friends and standing in the front. Those young ladies certainly love to have their picture taken. Here's our mother again, posing, looking very pretty. That picture reminds me so much of my daughter Patty. Same profile. Here are more pictures of her. The picture at the lower corner is with a boyfriend, I guess. Here's a picture of the house on Pleasant Street, or North Pleasant Street, and that's Grandpa Duquette standing in the front, and on the fence post is a cage with a parrot in it. You'll be seeing that picture again when you see the picture of the actual house as it looks today later on in this video, but I thought you'd like to see it here. Can't really see the parrot. This is probably in the house, either in this house or in the one in Bradford Court. He's sitting at his organ. That organ wound up in Uncle Joe Pelletier's house for many, many years. We used to play with it when we were kids. But at some point when they were going to redo the house, they gave it to the Salvation Army. What a loss. Here's a picture taken at the Goat Rock. That's over behind Bradford Court. And that's a picture of Mama and either Uncle Edmund or Uncle Omer, and then Aunt Doria and Grandpa Duquette. This is another picture at the Goat Rock, and it could be either Uncle Albert from Fall River or Uncle Joe Duquette, who went to New York and died there, I guess. He lived on the Bowery. I used to think that was a pretty fancy place when I heard about it when I was a little kid in school. Little did I know what it really was. This is a picture of Uncle Joe Pelletier and Aunt Doria Duquette and their wedding. And standing next to Uncle Joe is our grandfather Gilbert. Standing next to Aunt Doria is Uncle Joe's father. I don't know his first name. At the top is Uncle Joe Pelletier's family. There's Morris, Uncle Joe, Norman in the back, Lucille in the front, Aunt Doria, and Irvie. With the tricycle is Norman. That's Morris on the left. That's when he graduated from La Salle Academy. And on the right, that's Lucille on the pony. We had a picture of you on a pony too, and one of Eldridge. The one of you, I think we sent with a bunch of pictures some years ago. This is a picture of Uncle Albert Duquette in Fall River and his wife Aunt Leah Duquette. This is a picture of Aunt Deedmont Duquette at her wedding with Uncle Edmund Duquette, her father Mr. Herbert, and our grandfather Gilbert Duquette. This is a picture of Uncle Omer Duquette. Standing behind him is our grandfather Gilbert, and Anna Reese Duquette with her father standing behind her. This is a picture of our Uncle Adelaide Duquette and his family, Aunt Evelina, and all the children. I can't identify each one. Perhaps you can, because you were about the age of the older girls at the time this was taken. Really looks as if it was taken in Arkwright. I didn't know that they had lived there. This looks like a picture of Palm and Julia. Look at those bows in the back of the hair and the long curls. Wasn't that beautiful? I think Julia looks a little bit like Mama. Now this has to be either Jeanette or Irene, I really don't know, and one of the boys. Perhaps you would recognize them. This was your cousin Julia's wedding, Julia Duquette, when she married Adelard Provost, who we called Tsiboy. And behind her are her sister Irene Duquette and Pete Legue, and they later were married too. All these men have died now, and so has Irene. But Julia is still living. She's the oldest one living, as is Jeanette and Bertha and Arlene. Eldridge is also living. This is the house at Spencer Street that was renovated from a barn so that Uncle Edmund and Aunt Delma could live there. There's the chicken coop in the back. I used to love to go play in the chicken coop. And there's the bungalow with our parents, Alvia and Leonidas, in the front. He remodeled that to add a little sewing room in the front. Here's a picture of Leonidas with his horse. I don't know where that was taken, but he always had a nice little carriage with a horse. That was a beautiful horse. I remember that the house on Fairview Avenue, the bungalow, was dug out, that is, the cellar was dug out with the help of a horse. He and the horse did it all themselves before the house was built. Well, that's the end of the photo album for now. Now I'm going to take you for a ride, and I want you to know that the first pictures you're going to see on this film were taken on I-95 when we were going up to Pawtucket and Attleboro, and it was the first time I had ever turned the camera on, so there were a few little bad spots on it, but bear with me. The first place we're going to go to is in Pawtucket. That was at 43 Margaret Street, and that's the house where Mama stayed when she was a young girl, or where she lived. I'm not sure whether they lived there very long. From there, they went to South Attleboro, and there's a picture of a house at 90 West Carpenter Street. The house is a newer looking place, and I think that perhaps the original house was destroyed and a new one rebuilt there, but that was the address. And the next one you will see is James Street in Attleboro, and the house where you were born was at 3 James Street. When I took a picture of all the little cottages on the street, I found that the last house was number 27, and after that was a street and then a huge parking lot for some kind of industry. So the house at 3 James Street was apparently destroyed to make room for this parking lot. And unfortunately, we can't see the house where you were born, but at least you know that you were born somewhere there in the parking lot, if that's any consolation. So let's go off now, and we'll take a ride up to look at the foliage on the way. Enjoy! We're going up Route 95 now on this beautiful Sunday morning. We're going up to Attleboro and Pawtucket to see the places where Mama lived when she was a young girl and where you were born. This is the Providence skyline coming up. Very pretty this morning and quite different from what you remembered, I'm sure. I hope you'll excuse the beginning of this part of the film. It was the very first time that I had turned this camcorder on, so I didn't do a very good job. We're now in Pawtucket. This is 43 Margaret Street, where Mama lived as a young girl. She must have been in her late teens. She received a card from someone while living there in the early 1900s. There's a better view of the house. This is the only house that I found standing in that area of the state. We're now in South Attleboro, and we're on West Carpenter Street. The house you will see now is at 90 West Carpenter Street. However, that's not the original house. That is too modern, and I guess Mama lived there with Grandpa when she was very young again. And there's a mill not too far in the background. Behind the house, you'll see a chimney shortly, and that's probably where he worked. This is in South Attleboro. There's the little street, and there's a cafe across the way, which was probably very convenient. Grandpa was a bartender in Wisconsin. Now we're going up toward the northwestern part of Attleboro to the place where you were born. And this was such a pretty street, I had to get a picture. The place we're going to is James Street. That's James. The house that our parents lived in when you were born was at number 3 James Street. And it's a very pretty street. There's a bunch of little cottages, all the same with little bay windows. Must have been a very pleasant place to live. It's coming up soon. There it is. And we started with high numbers and went down the street. And that last house at the end is number 27. I was disappointed over that because I was looking for number 3. So apparently, as you'll see as we get closer, there's a street there and a huge parking lot for some industry. So apparently all the other little houses to the end of that street, over probably up to those houses you see in the far background, all those houses were torn down to make room for this parking lot. So, all I can say, Yvonne, is that you were born somewhere in that parking lot. We'll be going back up this street again and turning the corner on the right to Maple Street, and that will take us down to the church. It wasn't a very long walk, probably a half a mile to the church, so it's convenient for everyone, and the church is on Route 1. The church is St. Joseph's, and that's where you were baptized on October 15, 1912. It's a long time ago, isn't it? We're back in the Patuxent Valley, coming down Main Street toward Thornton's Theater. Thornton's Theater used to be where that empty lot is, and that car is on the left, I guess. No, well, maybe right here. I can't even recognize the place anymore. We're driving down toward Lippet now. Hasn't changed much. This is a postcard showing the Patuxent River from Harris Bridge. It looks down toward the Methodist Church in Phoenix. That's a very old card that Mama received from someone. It hasn't changed much either. It's still pretty looking from the bridge. This is a picture of Phoenix Square before the buildings were demolished. That tall building is a dry goods store. I can't remember the name of it. And we used to buy cloth there and sewing things. The other flat-looking building is the news store. Mr. Richard used to run that, and we used to buy newspapers and candies there. Downstairs is a pool parlor. On the back of the building was a grocery store, and I used to stop there on my way to school in the morning to pick up a piece of fruit or some candy.
We side with the people and we side.
You can see the car tracks. They used to take the trolley to Natick and Rocky Point and Arctic, but I guess there were no cars. I can just see a horse and buggy over there. It looks like it might have been paved with brick. Certainly has changed a lot. There's the Phoenix Hotel across from the square. Nice place for everyone to socialize. Our father spent a lot of time there, enjoyed it so much. All his friends used to congregate there. And then, of course, it became the Phoenix Sportsman's Club. This is St. Peter and Paul Church up on Highland Street. On the other side of the street was the Phoenix Grammar School. I wonder if that's the school you went to. This is the Royal Mills in River Point. This is where Papa lived, or worked, when I was a little girl. He used to work here 6 days a week, sometimes 10 or 12 hours a day. I think he earned about $8 a week, and I remember Mama used to say on payday he had one of those big galvanized pails. She would give him a nickel, and he would go to have it filled with beer, and that was his weekend treat, a big pail of beer. I used to work around the corner from there at the On-Off Shoe Company. They did make shoes. It was World War II, and they made flying suits for the Air Force. And I remember buying some smaller jackets, child-sized jackets for your boys, Kent and Rayner. I think they remember those jackets too. This is still a pretty building. This is Phoenix Square, the way it looks now, with the monument over there. That monument was dedicated to Omer Duquette. He was one of those flyers who went over Tokyo with General Doolittle on that famous flight. Eldridge's name is on that memorial, and it's right across from the Phoenix Hotel. Now we're going over the Phoenix Bridge up toward Fairview Avenue. Across the bridge, or across the river rather, here used to be the library, and that's where the person I was named after, Velna Craig, worked. That building has been torn down. Back looking toward Lippet, we can see the Pleasant Street. I was telling a story about the ice from the river coming up in a terrible winter, after a terrible winter freeze, and it went all the way up that street. There's the sign, the Village of Phoenix, very French community, and there's the Phoenix Mill. I don't know whether Papa ever worked there. And there's a view of the river from the bridge. The new bridge, of course. The old bridge was torn down and a new one made. Isn't that a pretty scene on a fall morning? It was cold, too, this morning. Look at the reflections in the water. That's looking in the opposite direction of the picture that you saw earlier, looking from the Harris Bridge. Again, we're looking up toward where the ice flowed way beyond that Phoenix Hotel. The road was just covered with ice in that big freeze. Mr. Spencer wrote a story about that, and I think I may have sent a copy of it to Beverly and Rayner. That's Notre Dame Church, Our Lady of Good Counsel, as we called it in French. That's on Pleasant Street in Phoenix. And that's where Gilbert Duquette and his wife Marie Pelequin were buried from, where our parents Leonidas and Aldea were married and buried from, where Eldridge was buried from. You were married here, and so was I, and Brian was baptized here. So there's a lot of history in that church for our family. Across the street, you'll see the school where Eldridge and I went to school. I don't know whether you went to school there. Or did I skip that? Of course, this church has been remodeled. It didn't have brick on it before. There's the school. I graduated from there in 1940, and Eldridge graduated back in 1930 or 31. It was a great school. I've learned a lot, and I still remember some of the Latin and some of the algebra that I learned there. We were so far advanced over the public schools. There's a better view of the church. This is a house in Bradford Court, and it's up off North Pleasant Street. If you notice the molding, you can't see it too well next to the door. I saw that in a picture that I have upstairs, and I know that that is the house where our grandparents Gilbert and Marie Pelequin lived. Behind there, through the woods, is the Goat Rock. There are some of the pictures you saw earlier were taken there, but you can't see that anymore because of the trees having grown. They lived here in the early 1900s. The house has been remodeled or an addition put on it. This is a postcard. I set it on the side of the car. It's a house on North Pleasant Street. It's a duplex, and that's our grandfather Gilbert with a cage. You can't see the parrot in it. And this is the house as it looks today. It doesn't look at all like it did then with a pretty picket fence, but I guess people who were building the road there took some of the front yard, and someone put a stone wall in and a fence. But it's still a duplex, and I could tell which house it was because of those two little windows upstairs. This is the Harris Mill in Harris, and Mama worked there. And this is another part of it. Guess everyone worked in the mills in those days. That's all there was in industry, I guess. And now we're coming up Main Street in Harris toward the little house where you lived as a little girl, that's the blue house. And Mama used to say she just loved living there. I guess that was her favorite place to live, other than the bungalow. And that's across the street, looking at the river. What a pretty sight on a fall day from that little house. I can understand why they enjoyed living there. The house that we just saw belonged to the Asheys, and I had a girlfriend, Mary Ashey, who lived there. And one time, she came to visit at your house over in Cohasset. We're coming into Arkwright now. And these are the buildings from the Arkwright Mill and the Interlochen Mill. And the big chimneys. How I love those chimneys. They were all over the Patuxent Valley from all the mills. It was quite a feat to build those things, and they were built just right, and they have stood up for years and years and years. Now we're coming up to the Arkwright Bridge. That's the only one with the original span, the old-fashioned span. It's quite unique. It's pretty antique, I guess. That's interesting. And the wooden boards still bump along. We're coming up Howard Avenue now, going to drive up toward where Uncle Joe and Aunt Doria Duquette, Uncle Joe Peltier, Aunt Doria Duquette used to live. These are the village houses around a common green. The common green doesn't exist, as you can see there, but that house that you can see is where they lived. Now there are houses all over the green. And there's another view of the house, and that's where they lived on the left-hand side. I wonder if our parents lived on the right-hand side, because I've seen pictures of you and Eldridge and Mama standing on the steps. This is the river behind the houses. I remember as a little girl coming there to play with Norman, and in the summertime the boys used to dangle from the branches and fall into the water. How I envied them, because they could swim and I couldn't. They were like fish in the water. What a pretty place. This is Aunt Evelina's house in Harris, where she and Uncle Adelard Duquette lived. Her name was Duquette also. We used to come here Sunday nights. All the relatives, Uncle Joe and Aunt Doria, and Uncle Edmund and Aunt Dilma, and our parents also. And Uncle Adelard used to serve some of his homemade wine in little tiny shot glasses, and even all of us little kids had a sip of it. Peter Legue lives there now. He was Irene's son, and of course his father was Peter Legue also. We're coming back toward Phoenix, and we're going to go up Fairview Avenue. We're crossing the bridge. That's the Ashenbow house. Always a beautiful house. This street was the prettiest street in the valley. I think it still is. I used to walk up there once a day and down once a day, and sometimes I'd go home for lunch from school too. That's the Riak house. We used to think it was a haunted house, but it's been beautifully renovated. It was so dilapidated. Now this is another view of the river. I had to take that again. I just love the reflections of the trees and the sky and the clouds in the river. But we'll be going back up the hill again. Isn't that beautiful? This is the Coogan house, and you probably remember Agnes, Richard, Marie. And this is the Madison House. in terrible shape. Arnold Madison lived there. He was Eldridge's friend. And that's the Kernan house. You remember all the girls, Louise, Mary, Barbara, and Nancy. And, of course, Eddie was killed in World War II. Louise was killed by a horse. Barbara is still living. That's the McBride house on the corner of Fairview and Hillside Avenue. We go into Hillside Avenue to get to the cemetery where our parents and Eldridge are buried. They're buried in St. Peter and Paul Cemetery. I love that house, but this is my favorite with the stone tower. That was Mrs. Ralph's house. I used to walk home from school and always stop and look at that house because that was truly my favorite. This is Clarence Spencer's house. He used to manage the Greenwood Cemetery. His father's the one who wrote the story about the ice in Phoenix Bridge. And this is Campbell's house. Harold Campbell lived there. He had the grain mill down in Harris across from Aunt Evelina's house. We're coming up to where we lived now. There's Esther Bourne's house. Remember Esther, Mrs. Bourne, and Mr. Bourne? They didn't talk to each other. She used to eat in the kitchen, and he ate in the dining room with Esther. It's a pretty house. That's the house that was in our backyard. It was a barn at one time, and Papa renovated it to make a home for Uncle Edmund and Aunt Deedma, and they lived there, paid $4 a week rent for so many years. And there's the bungalow where I was born. It's been remodeled some, but not too much. It still looks a lot like it did before. There's the front view of it. And there's our house, Tim's house and mine, that we built back around 1950, sorry. And the Greenwood Cemetery. It was a pretty place to take the girls riding in the strollers. I used to take a big paper bag and fill it with pine cones for my Christmas decorating. The day this was taken, Palma DeRoyne's daughter, Pauline, was being buried here. She was the one who was such a beautiful artist. She died at age 56. Now we're going to come down Woodside Avenue. There are houses on the left-hand side, all new houses. Quinn's house was torn down to make room for them. What a shame. That was such a beautiful home. But I thought you'd like to see some of the foliage coming down Woodside Avenue. It's a cloudy day, though, and it's not too bright. There it is. A little better now. Look at that picket fence. Or white fence. It's a lot of work to keep those fences painted. And Woodside Avenue certainly doesn't look like it used to. I remember walking down this hill to go to work in River Point, especially when there was a severe snowstorm and Papa couldn't drive me. We're coming down Division Street now in East Greenwich. Remember that famous fork in the road that divided First Avenue from Division Street? We're heading down toward the old post office, which is no longer a post office. At this point, Tim and I could see masts of the boats down in the bay, but you can't really see them on this camera. I should have used the zoom lens on that. Oh, it's kind of pretty. We're coming down now toward the armory. We're headed up Division Street now. That was Dr. Young's old house on the right. We're going in the opposite direction from the one we just came down in. Our purpose in coming back up here is that we want to drive over by the Howland place where you used to work. I'm afraid, though, that the foliage will be too thick and we won't be able to see the house. However, Tim had a surprise for me. As you will see, when we're coming up the street, he actually turned into the driveway. The house is up here, over on the left. We can't see it at all. But now we're turning into the driveway. This is the back of the house, and when we came in here, Mrs. Poncelet was in the yard with another woman and a couple of workmen. And I was embarrassed, but I decided that since Tim had driven in, I'd better go over and just tell her what we were doing. I spoke with her and told her about you, and she said by all means, just take all the pictures I wanted to, walk all around the house. So I did. This is the front yard. We were in the back of the house, and we're coming around the side now. She has just had it repainted. Her husband died just a few months ago, and somehow she must have gotten a lot of money because she is spending a lot of money on it now. It's just beautiful, just all freshly done over. Isn't it a lovely place? Probably just the way you remember it. I guess you have a lot of memories in this house, and that's where the children went to school too. I remember when you and Lucille worked here. Like a jewel. Over there is the field where Mr. Poncelet used to keep the horses. During a thunderstorm a few years ago, 3 of his horses were struck by lightning in the field and were killed. I don't know whether she still keeps horses. I didn't see any. It's beautiful, isn't it? Now we're over on Quaker Lane and South County Trail, over by Bostitch. You knew some people who work there. There's a little pond out front over by the highway, and all these Canadian geese live there. Some of them live there all winter. They just congregate there, and people stop and take pictures of them, feed them. They don't pay too much attention to the no trespassing signs. They can't read, I guess, can they? See the sign out there in the foreground over by the water? It says no trespassing. Wouldn't Ted have a ball here? He wouldn't have to bring his gun. He'd just have to scoop him up with his arms. I don't know what those tall ones are. Now we're going down I-95 again to pick up a little bit more foliage. I wanted to get as much foliage as possible on this tape. Actually, it was probably prettier when we were in Maryland, but we hadn't bought the camera either. But there's still some left, a little bit of color that you can enjoy and remember fall in New England. We still have a lot of trees in Rhode Island, don't we? It's amazing with all the condos that are going up that we have anything left. We're coming up now to the Apponaug Print Works. Guess that's something you remember. And over there, that high tower is from the Apponaug City Hall. It's still standing. It's a very old building. There's Mrs. Lum's house. We'll see that again later. Now we're on Spencer Avenue, and we're coming up to Mrs. Rodriguez's house, where you used to work. Another of those places where you lived in beautiful accommodations. I'm walking here, so it's taking me a little time to get over to the front of the house. Across the street was her mother's house. That was Mrs. Martin's house. I remember you speaking about her. Both properties are beautifully kept. And there's Mrs. Martin's house again. And there's Mrs. Lum's house. You work there too. You certainly could pick them. There's the house next door. It has a bunch of pumpkins sitting on the porch railing. I should have zoomed that in. And that's the Lyle house. Remember the big swan that used to sit out there in the middle of the front lawn? That's gone now. The house isn't as pretty as it used to be. The School of Design uses this as one of their alternate studios for kids to take lessons. This is Ray's store. It's now a barber shop. Chick used to give me a quarter on Sundays when we came down to visit, and I'd just run over there. I thought that was the greatest treat. Buy my candy. And there's a side view of the cottage down in Cohasset. That's where you lived when Beverly was born. And up there on the hill It's the old homestead where Chick was living when you married him. And Joe and Will lived there also, and Lester and Laura. That was a pretty little cottage. You really enjoyed living there. I remember how you entertained after you were married and lived there. You entertained like the people you worked for. You had all pretty china and crystal, and I remember a dinner party you were planning with crystal finger bowls. I wonder if people knew what to do with them. This house, the orange-colored one, sort of orange, is the house on Herbert Street, where you moved after you moved out of the cottage. You spent the summer there while waiting to acquire the big house on Post Road. I spent the summer there too with you, and I had such a good time with all the kids down the street. That's across the street from that cottage. It had a nice view of the water. And I guess you could go clamming down there too. Now we're back on Post Road, heading for the house at 4162 Post Road. You can see the pillars of the driveway coming up. I don't know how Chick ever got through those with his big trucks. We're driving in. Tim said that we are driving in, and he really takes over. That huge tree. I wonder if that was the mulberry tree. I know you had a mulberry tree out there. And that's the apartment building that's standing there now, your front steps, going up toward where the den used to be, and there was a big tree there too. And your front yard was there, a big front porch. I'm going to walk around the back of the building and behind the trees that they have planted there to keep people from falling off the bank under the railroad tracks. And here I am walking on that little bank. The trains still come through, but not the big freight trains, just the passenger trains between Boston and New York. You can see the masts from the boats over in Folly Landing not too far down the road. It's a big harbor now. There's a close-up. And boats are not in for the winter yet. A lot of those boats were damaged by Hurricane Bob. We're looking over toward Buttonwoods, Oakland Beach, Rocky Point, all in that area. I remember winters not too long ago when you could walk across the bay right over there. It was completely covered with thick ice. Doesn't seem possible, does it? Well, guess what? I hear a sound coming. There's the train. I hadn't expected to see one today. It's pretty close. This is where the restaurant was, Dutchland Farms. You had your last big enterprise here. Lita Petrarca and I worked there, and that's where she met Bob Lord and I met Tim. We used to work at Davisville from 7 to 3 and then come to work 4 to 11, I guess, or 10 at the restaurant as waitresses. It was a fun place. You had some interesting people working there. Get that tree. That's where Chick used to get into trouble with his truck. We're on Crompton Avenue now, or coming up to Crompton Avenue. This is an overpass over the railroad tracks. You can't cross the tracks anywhere along here anymore. All the crossings are closed off because there were so many traffic deaths. That's Marilyn Rathbun's house on the left on Crompton Avenue. We're headed for the town dump. Now we're going back again over the new bridges that go past the railroad tracks. There's a lot of money spent on these new roads so that people wouldn't have to cross the tracks anymore. Lots of overpasses. We're headed for Scallop Town. And here are some of the still remaining buildings that survived so many hurricanes. And the fishing fleet out there. I can't believe there's still so many boats docked nearby. I guess the fishermen are out to lunch. Goddard Park is across the way. There's some more fishing boats. Not too elegant a fleet, but they make a living. There's Warren Finn's seafood place. That's where I bought those little necks I brought to California. Fresh off the boats. They hadn't even been washed. And the restaurants are lined up right next to the seafood place. These are the pleasure boats. Still quite a few in the water for late October. You can see the Greenwich Yacht Club in the background. We'll be going over that way. This is a pirate inviting you in to lunch or dinner at the in-between. There's the old jail, still standing. Now has offices in part of it. I think I remember someone we know spending some time there. Do you know anybody? This is an old mill complex that was made into condos. And that's looking up the street toward the old courthouse. That's up King Street. Now we're walking around in front of the old jail and going toward the yacht club. This is 20 Water Street, a lovely restaurant, though I haven't eaten there yet, but I've heard it's lovely. We had drinks out on the dock one day in the summertime. It's very, very pleasant out there. We're going toward the yacht club now. These are some of the boats that have been pulled in for the winter. Not all of them have, of course. People are procrastinating. These boats came in voluntarily. Hurricane Bob puts them in there involuntarily. Just moved them right up over the walls. There's a lot of money out there in that water. Again, we're looking toward Goddard Park. These are the beautiful pleasure boats. Must be a lot of traffic when they all get out at the same time. I think a lot of people just keep them there and go sit on them. Don't even take them out. They just enjoy entertaining on them. We're looking over toward Goddard Park again. Now we're coming up King Street toward the courthouse. The building is not in very good condition, and I guess the town is hoping someone will come up with some money to help refurbish it. Otherwise, we don't know what will happen to it. Must have been standing there for a couple hundred years. Now we're going to take a walk down Main Street, and this is the old Kent Theater. Isn't it terrible? McDonald's wanted to buy it and build a restaurant there. They were negotiating for about 2 years, and then everything fell through. I remember that when it was the USO during World War II. And that's one of our defunct credit unions on the left. There was a tiny little building way down the other end of the street, and they built this beautiful one just as Davidsville did, and then everybody just fell into the doldrums. They got into trouble. These are some of the old buildings on Main Street. The funeral home studio downstairs and apartments upstairs. Used to be Hills, I think, funeral home. Here are more of the old buildings on the left-hand side heading north on Main Street. That's looking up toward the Kentish Guards Armory. And there's the courthouse again. parades usually wind up there with ceremonies on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. Now we're looking down toward the Greenwich Theater. That's closed also. Steve Arenagus would like to have present plays and use it as a real theater sometime. I hope he get it. There's the old post office down at the end. No longer a post office, of course. Those towers right here are new apartments. The store had just a flat roof, and those were built on top. Very pretty. Now I'm walking up Division Street again at a little slower pace. It's slower than in the car. Over here on the right-hand side is Dr. Young's old house. That's where he lived when he had his office over across the street. That's the Eldridge House on the corner of Division Street and Pierce Street. Must be a couple hundred years old. This is a church. It was a church. It's now a private home. And this is Windmill Cottage. You probably remember the poem that Longfellow wrote about that. He used to come visiting here. Here are some boot scrapers I saw in front of the Eldridge House. They must be a couple hundred years old, too. And there's the First Baptist Church. Those were some of the people in East Greenwich who probably wouldn't have much lunch if they didn't have that place to go to. That's the Varnum House. And of course there's stories about George Washington visiting there. We're walking up toward St. Luke's now. There's St. Luke's. Looking down toward the Greenwich Hotel. Someone has been repainting the front of it. The white really looks pretty. And I'm sure the pitch every morning so people can walk by. That's St. Luke's again. There's the Kentish Guards Armory, and you can see some of the library back there. The front of it is too dark to take a picture of. You'll have to wait till later when the sun's on it. And there's the police station. It's on the property where the old academy used to be. Looking towards St. Luke's again. We're going down Pierce Street now, past some of those very old houses, and we'll be turning into the street where Lil used to live. Remember, this street. That house on the right with the intricate rail upstairs, that's Joe Reed's house. Remember Joe Reed, the lawyer? And we're coming up to Lil's house. It's the last white house on the right. That's where Lil Taylor was living when she died. She had a little apartment upstairs, and this is called Liberty Street. Right up there. I used to meet her in Elmex all the time, and we'd talk for a long time. She'd always ask about you and your family. We're coming into Wickford now, and we're going down Brown Street, which is a very pretty street with old buildings in the town. We're heading for the harbor. So many of these homes were built in the early 1700s, or mid-1700s. There's St. Paul's Church. Lee Spencer's son Peter is the pastor there. All these homes have been renovated. They were in terrible condition at one time, but people just started to renovate them, and it's such a beautiful street now. We're coming down toward the harbor. A lot of the fishing boats tie up here. There's also a seafood place or two where you can buy fresh fish from off the boats. Here comes a boat in now with its catch. This fellow's fishing, I guess. I don't think I'd want to eat the fish he caught there. We're going back now, and we're going to turn down Main Street in Wickford. That's the main shopping area, and Ryan's Market is over there on the right. And the little shopping boutiques and stores on both sides of the street. We're going up Boston Neck Road. Tim wanted you to see what they're doing down in Jamestown. We're getting a new bridge, as you probably know. This is the new road that was built. They just dynamited all that rock on both sides and made a new road. We're coming down to the bridge now. We'll be going over the old and taking a look at the new. You find the camera kind of bobbing up and down here. The old road is so bumpy. There's part of the new bridge with the road that will be going over it. There's quite a bit of work done on it. It was at a standstill for almost a year while people were arguing about who was going to get the contract and what was wrong with the bridge, and the contractors were fired and new contractors hired. Then they went on strike in January, just after the bank crisis, when they got a check for a couple $1 million that bounced. The governor sure had a lot of problems in January, but then they started up again, and it may be finished sometime next year. They're connecting all the spans now, though short distance on each side will be retained for people who like to fish. It'll be kind of nice for them. Recently, buses and trucks weren't allowed on the bridge because of the damage done by Hurricane Bob. We saw pictures of this cement under the bridge, terribly deteriorated. But we're brave people. We have faith that it'll hold us one more time. We're driving up toward Beavertail now. We're turning in. There's a good view of Newport Bridge sitting up there. I wonder if our new Jamestown Bridge will look so elegant when it's finished. Now we're up on the west side of Beavertail, looking over toward Bonnet Shores, Narragansett. The water is calm today. Of course, this is the more quiet side of the island anyway. There's the Coast Guard house and the old light. This building is now a museum. We're on the other side now. The day that Hurricane Bob was coming in, Sharon called from Maryland to ask if Dad had been over here. He really wanted to come, but he heard on the radio that the road was closed down at the causeway. It's a good thing he never came up here. It must have been quite a picture. So that's all for now. We'll take a ride back down the hill. It would be ridiculous to try to climb these steps. Just look at what the storm did to them. There's Tim standing up here, looking the situation over. We're heading back down the hill from Beavertail. We'll be coming up to the causeway soon. We'll stop there so that you can see the piles of sand that have been brought in to replace the beach. The beach was completely taken away during the hurricane. Here's a little more foliage for you. Way. I'm going to try to bring in those piles of sand. This is the town beach. Busy place in the summertime. Goes right out to the ocean. From the causeway, looking over toward the Jamestown Bridge, you can see some men out there and some flats. I don't know what they're digging for. Probably clams or quags. Must be low tide, and it sure does smell out here. Jamestown proper, down where the old ferry dock used to be, just about here, where that car is parked. Ferry's long gone. hotel that was standing on that site right ahead was torn down and rebuilt, just the way it used to look. Uh-oh, this is where the old ferry dock used to be. Tim corrected me. The condo up there in the tower originally was on sale for $500,000. But because of bankruptcy problems, it sold for about half that price.
You go right into
Going up the hill now. And that's it. That's the end of the shopping district. The business section. Not very big. A bit more foliage here, but there's not that much left. We're coming up to the old windmill. Out here on the farm. Lots of farms out here in Jamestown, and still working farms too. Well, I guess we're going to be leaving Jamestown now, and we'll try to think of another place to go. To the Jamestown Bridge again, so that we can get back home to Wickford and to East Greenwich. Back on Brown Street in Wickford.
Ryan's Market.
There's Ryan's Market over there on the left. And the little boutiques up ahead. Fun place to shop and so pretty at Christmas time. New England pumpkin stand. All the things that make it so much fun for kids. Can't see the witch's face, maybe it's looking 12. We're going down Love Lane now. This is one street that's still as pretty as it ever was. Hasn't changed much. Going back now in the opposite direction, maybe catch some scenery on the other side of the street. The old tennis court's still there. This is the latest thing in private homes in this area. We're going to do the other side of Main Street now. This is the Elms. That's a familiar landmark to you. Has a new little boutique and I guess a barber shop in there. Chick used to hang out here a lot. It's been all redone, but they have trouble getting businesses in there. It was going to be a restaurant once. These are little antique shops along the side of the street. People are trying to make them more and more attractive. These are across the street. And there's the old brick house that has offices in it now. That's a very, very old house. And the fire station next to it. Didn't Dr. Taggart have an office there in the old brick house? And there's the old bell from the original town hall that was over down the street next to Browning's. Here are more little antique shops. The Methodist Church. That's an attractive little place. They try so hard to make Main Street attractive, but businesses are changing all the time. And there's the hotel. Looks like it's being refurbished. That front part with the white has been recently painted. It'd be great if they could do something with the downstairs. There's still an old bar down there and empty stores. Could be a lovely place if someone had money to spend on it. The bar on the left does a whale of a good business. There's a painter coming out to survey his work, I guess. There's a store where you can buy trolls and Halloween costumes. They did a good business during this season. And when you go inside, it's surprising. There are lots of nice things. There's an old house with a couple little boutiques. And where you see the bay windows, that's where Browning's used to be. It's alias Smith & Jones now. It's a restaurant and night spot. And that's the library, the front of it. The sun finally got around. Welcome to New England, Yvonne. This is our street. Foliage is deteriorating somewhat, but it's still pretty this morning. And here's our house. For Halloween, the pumpkins are for Sean, Megan, Melanie, and Jeff. I made the wreath from straw flowers I planted 2 years ago. They've been hanging in the garage, and Tim's been complaining about them, wondering what I was going to do with them. So I finally put them to good use. And there's our little knocker on the door. This is where we'll spend Thanksgiving. We expect that Donald and Maurice will be with us. in our street again. Our favorite dog, he lives next door, comes to get his biscuits every morning. He pushes Tim toward the back door so that Tim will get up inside the back hall and go to his box of cookies. He knows what closet it's in, too. He usually puts one foot up at a time for Tim. There's one, and there's another one. He'll do anything to get a cookie. This is the other end of our street. Lots of leaves. I dread to think of the cold. But that's New England. And then spring is just around the corner, I guess. Soon we'll have Christmas decorations up. Well, that's the end of the storm. I thought I'd treat you to a New England sunset. This isn't the best that we've had, but it will do for now. Hope you enjoyed the video. We had so much fun doing it. Tim drove me around and we saw a lot of places we had never thought we'd see. So I hope you'll enjoy this. Good night, Irene.